Today I'm breaking down this Levi Ackerman sketch and explaining the full process behind how I approached the drawing. For this piece, the main goal wasn't exaggerated movement or explosive action. Even though it was kind of an action pose, I didn't draw the entire pose from the reference I was looking at, but it is actually an action pose, but this is more zoomed in. His body is in a specific structure. He's like winding up to do something. He's holding the equipment that he uses to swing. Um, the equipment that they use in Attack on Titan to swing from different platforms and make themselves airborne so that they can land hits on the Titans. He's holding that stuff, and I zoomed in enough that you can't really see much of him holding it and the position he's in holding it. But because it's zoomed in, that's why I would say it's not as much of an explosive action pose. Instead, I wanted to focus on precision, control, and capturing Levi's personality through posture and expression. One thing that makes Levi difficult to draw is that his design looks simple at first, but small mistakes become very noticeable. So the first thing I focused on was head construction and facial proportions. He has very distinct face, so I try to make sure I get stuff like that correct. Obviously, I pay close attention to the eye spacing, jaw shape, and overall face structure because Levi's expression carries a huge part of his identity as a character. Even subtle changes in the eyes or mouth can completely change the way the drawing feels. Especially seeing that like he's one of the more or most like serious looking character. So like there's specific things you have to have correct, obviously, to have it look relevantly like him, or make sure he's easily identifiable. Even subtle changes in the eyes or mouth can completely change the way the drawing feels. After establishing the head, I started building the torso and shoulders. He's like in a twisted motion. So I had to also twist the torso as well and make sure I aligned that as correct as possible. That wasn't aligned as well as possible. The way his clothing sat around his torso caused me to get away with that, so it looks correct, but it wasn't as correct as it could be. The torso doesn't look like it would have had to zigzag to connect the way it did on the lower end, because on the lower end then it goes into like his belt and the upper part of his pants, and the torso didn't connect in as effectively as it could all the way down his body from where the shoulders sit to there, right? Or maybe it did, but it depends on like if you're aware of where everything is when I drew it. So like let's say I'm drawing something and maybe I'm being hyper aware because I'm aware of where I meant to place something, but someone else might see that and think, oh, that's placed correctly enough that they get the point, so maybe they're not looking too much into it. But if I want to improve, I do need to be more just be aware of like what I did correct or not, so I can clean it up next time, obviously, right? Instead, I focus on balancing clean structure. Okay, after establishing the head, I started building the torso and shoulders. Levi's posture is usually controlled and composed, so I avoided making the pose feel overly dramatic. Instead, I focus on balance and clean structure. One thing that helps with anime characters like Levi is keeping the silhouette readable. Even in a simpler pose, the viewer should immediately understand the body direction and overall shape. As I refined the anatomy, I tried to keep proportions compact and realistic while maintaining anime stylization. Levi isn't built like an oversized powerhouse character. So the anatomy needs to stay tighter and more grounded. Or you could even say just more um, normal build or whatever, without having to use terms like, oh, like could I, let's say that ectomorph is like more slim, mesomorph is like naturally more muscular, and then endomorph is has heavy amount of muscle mass and even fat on top of it. Uh, and let's say that Levi is in between like a mesomorph and an ectomorph, I guess, right? Or very much closer to ectomorph, I guess. And let's say that a lot of people in these animes could in general have that type of build, unless it's like an anime about martial arts and fighting, and or animes where people had to build their body more. um and I say had to because like nobody really is extremely jacked and cut and lean without having to have trained to do that on purpose in anime, or just anywhere in life in general. That's just not really a thing. Unless somebody was raised in like the jungle, or where they, had to literally function like a caveman. So maybe they spent all their time fighting wild animals to kill them and eat them, and or maybe they figured out that they need to train their body to become stronger, and they figured out some way to do that, and then that caused their body to be more ripped. People aren't just, maybe they could be ripped, but they're not super jacked and bulky and ripped just for no reason. Like that's like a thing that people have to gain on purpose, through a lot of effort. So obviously, um, so he's more like slim, maybe ripped, lean, right, compact. Um, where did I leave off here? Okay. One thing that, excuse me, let me just, I might have to reread just a little bit of what I was putting before I added some input. Levy's posture is usually very controlled and composed, so I avoided making the pose feel overly dramatic. Instead, I focus on balance, and clean structure. Did I already? Okay. Okay. One thing that helps with anime characters like Levy is keeping the silhouette readable. Even in a simpler pose, the viewers should immediately understand the body's direction and overall shape. I did say that. As I refined the anatomy, I tried to keep the proportions compact and realistic while maintaining anime stylization. Levy isn't built like an oversized powerhouse character, so the anatomy needs to stay tighter and more grounded. Not to say that something else will be ungrounded, but realistically for him, like what does he realistically look like? He's not realistically looking like what I just explained, which is like oversized. I also spent time refining the clothing folds because folds help reinforce movement and body structure underneath the outfit. The folds around the shoulders, arms, and torso help give the drawing more depth and realism. For the line work, I focus on cleaner strokes instead of overly rough sketch lines. Excuse me. Sharp and confident line placement works really well for serious characters because it gives the drawing a more polished and controlled appearance. Another thing I paid attention to was the neck and shoulder connections because that area heavily affects the strength and posture of the character. Obviously, it's really just more like one shoulder, it's covered in clothing. He even has like a, not a bib, but like it's like colonial themed clothing, and he has like the thing cover. It's like a napkin covering his neck or whatever, right? But underneath that is everything structured properly so that it looks correct. And then I draw the clothes properly on top of it. Once the structure was in place, I refined facial expression. Excuse me. Levy's expression is usually calm, serious, and slightly intimidating, so I wanted to keep the same energy in the sketch. What are ways I can do that? Like making sure that if I'm looking at a reference, like the eye structure and eyebrow structure, probably nose structure, and even like maybe um, face overall, just facial structure. He has more of a narrow face, I could say. These are all things I just mentioned. These are all things that we're going to like why his face looks more serious. Um, he doesn't even like if you're talking about anime art, he doesn't actually follow anime art guidelines as much. You could see someone who looks like him in like normal cartoons, right? But like, what are things that define exactly what he looks like? And his face is like a huge deal when it comes to that, right? Um, a lot of people have this a similar body type in this anime. A lot of the soldiers, right? Levy's expression is usually calm, serious. I already read this, and slightly intimidating. So I want to keep the same energy in the sketch. One important lesson with anime art is understanding that not every strong drawing needs an extreme action pose. Um, Sometimes posture, expression, and clean structure can create just as much impact. Um, that's something characters like Levy are great for practicing because they force you to focus more on precision and less on exaggeration. That's a good point. I vaguely mentioned this in maybe other ways and completely different topics, but one thing I have said in it in general that I'll like maybe expand on this a little bit. So there certain characters. Let's say that no character you draw, you can just do a whole bunch of things in general and come up with a character. Let's say each character has distinct things about them. Um, but maybe those things aren't way too distinct when you look at that character amongst a bunch of other characters in that specific series. And let's say every series has its own laws of how everything needs to look. Like, let's say that in Attack on Titan, most people are between mesomorph and ectomorph, but closer to ectomorph. That's literally how most people look. And then there's things called titans that are huge giant monsters, and those are very very tall mesomorphs. I guess you could just call it that, right? If you want to assign like things to be able to identify quickly without having to explain too much in detail what this character looks like. Well, let's say that then after that, what are things that define each character? Love you could say his face. When you look at each other character, well, are they a female or a male? What are things in their facial structure? What are things about their eye shape? What are things about their hairstyle? Maybe the color of their hair, all that stuff, going into play. But overall, it's just like, what are the specific things that you can use to identify them? And then some characters have way more distinct identifying characteristics that you have to pay attention to get that character correct. So yeah, basically overall the sketch was mainly about the structure and clean line work, anatomy control, and capturing character presence through simplicity. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more anime drawing tutorials and sketch studies, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next video.